Hey everyone, welcome to the latest TeamEvilGSP on IGTV video. And yes, it's been a little bit since I've updated this series, and for that I apologize. It's very hard to move through all the many mediums and keep up with all the many things, but this seemed like the proper forum for this video. As you can see from my surroundings, I'm in the out of doors. I happen to be at the Cape Henlopen State Park in Lewis, Delaware. It's one of my absolute favorite destinations. If you follow my material, you'll have seen this general background, beaches and sand and things, many a times, because I genuinely have an affection for the place. And it is also important to this video that I saved this content for this locale. The reason I am here today is because my wife and I have just finished up our Saturday morning, typically weekend morning, both days, but today being Saturday, our Saturday morning walk. And that led me to the thinking about N.E.A.T and steps and some of the problems I have with the language, and to be fair, some of the reality, the absolute honesty of the language. So I wanted to take a few seconds here in this we walk, and I'll give you the details on that in a second. And then we stop and we have a little bowl of fruit and a cup of coffee. It's part of our ritual, and we are very ritualistic people, so it's a thing. So during the coffee portion, I will chat to you about steps, or more importantly, N.E.A.T. But steps is the language you typically hear. So I'll kind of finish with the walk that my wife and I took and how it fits into this conversation. But the first thing I want to talk about is you hear a lot about measuring steps, benchmarking steps, making sure you get your steps. It's always language about steps. Fair. Above steps, you will often hear about N.E.A.T. That steps are a way to track N.E.A.T, that sort of thing. So first of all, N.E.A.T, non-exercise accounted thermogenesis. I have heard other words for the A. When I was in university, I was taught accounted, non-exercise accounted thermogenesis. It's an excellent definition. It's a fantastic definition. If you were an exercise physiologist with access to a lab, that is exactly the thing you would choose to measure. That is an excellent definition. However, my problem with that definition is that most people don't have access to a lab. Even most professionals in this space don't have access to a lab and wouldn't be able to track such a thing. So I think the definition sort of breaks down at that point. But even still, if you go with that definition, then the idea of the thermogenesis, the thing that generates the heat, is movement. Movement is best measured by proxy in steps. So again, that tracks. And as much as I love to pick apart language and be very pedantic and present some better way of thinking, the reality is that's pretty good. That's pretty honest. But I think we can do one better. I really do. So bear with me. I suggest we stay with N.E.A.T as our acronym. It's still measuring N.E.A.T. And we're still going to measure N.E.A.T via steps. But I suggest we change the lettering, if you will, the wording. So N.E.A.T now should be, in my opinion, in the, let's call it the TeamEvilGSP mindset. N.E.A.T is non-exercise activity tracking. I like this definition for so many reasons. First of all, it literally describes the thing. Non-exercise. Okay, we know exactly what we are and are not measuring. If it's exercise, we're not measuring it. If it's not exercise, we're measuring it. Okay? Activity, that's what we're measuring. So now, any activity that is or isn't exercise goes into two different columns. Tracking. It's that we're going to track activity of these two columns. That's it. I love that definition because it's a definition that is so effective that at any moment in time, you're about to do something, you stop and go, is this or isn't exercise? And then proceed down lane A or B. Now, admittedly, that does require ultimately having a hierarched definition of exercise. We'll come to that in a moment. And that's actually why this comes full circle to the conversation of why I'm doing this video here and now at the completion of a walk with my wife. But if we go with non-exercise activity tracking, now the idea of steps is the kind of daily activity. That is your day. It is a measurement of your activeness. If you work at a desk versus you work at a construction site versus you work at a shopping mall, you're going to have different ambient activities. And human activity is largely measured in movement, and movement is largely measured in steps. So it just tracks, bad pun intended, it just tracks so well. So if we go with that definition, which, again, if you were a client of any of the many coaches of Team EvilGSP, that is exactly the definition you would go with. And anyone out there who chooses to adopt it, cool. Our goal here is to make the world better, not to plant flags and things and decry that they are our own. So the idea is non-exercise, anything that's not exercise in terms of activity, we will track, most likely via steps. Perfect. Now, the non-exercise part is where it gets interesting, because one person's exercise perhaps is not another's. For instance, if you have any measure of physical fitness, reasonable body composition, etc., you could very easily make the argument that steps should not, walking, movement, locomotion should not be taxing and therefore not be exercise. But then you could also make the argument that if you were very wildly out of shape or injured or so many other things, that walking is challenging for you, well, the sheer fact that it's challenging would mean that it has effort, and therefore effort is probably going to work into your personal definition of exercise. So this, exactly what is and what isn't exercise, is an interesting, probably long and twisted conversation that I will actually be generous and charitable and leave to you to decide. But at the end of the day, the thing you need to remember for this general concept is there are things in your day that are not exercise. There are things that in your day that are exercise. As you choose to nomenclate and define them, they go in two different columns. The beauty of that is, if you have a smartwatch or a ring or a pedometer or whatever thing you have to track these steps, which I strongly suggest you do, you would turn it on, measure your daily activity, your work, your home, your this thing, your that thing. But then when you actually meet a moment in time when you're about to do prescribed exercise, you actually turn it off. Because that movement is not your daily activity. That is a prescribed bit of exercise. And this is, interestingly, the whole ring around the pincer maneuver to come back to why I'm doing this conversation here and now, having mentioned that I just walked with my wife. My wife has a very, very active job. Okay, she walks perhaps as much as 10,000 steps in a day's work, sometimes even more, but I think on an average, something like that. So her days are very, very active. She does not work Saturday and Sunday. So on Saturday and Sunday, she chooses to do said walks to sort of balance the ledger of activity. So to insert ambient activity to sort of match the days so that there's not a large drop-off in energy expenditure and just general activity. I, on the other hand, am literally, legally a cripple. Walking is very challenging for me. I'm also much shorter than my wife. I take smaller strides. So all things equal, for me to keep pace with her borders on exercise. My heart rate actually goes up to 120 or so. It is challenging. It generates an exercise response. So interestingly, though we both do the same activity on the same day, in the same place, because we enjoy the locale, because we enjoy each other's company, because, on her ledger, it goes down as non-exercise activity. However, on my ledger, it actually takes the place of low-tier cardiovascular exercise that I simply just prescribe myself, and now later in the day, I will not walk on the treadmill, cycle, etc. Because this is actually taxing enough that I am defining it as exercise, yet she is not. So the point here is which column things go in, and whether you turn the smartwatch or pedometer or what have you on or off is determined by the language, basically the periodization of what you believe the activity you're about to do is. But at the end of the day, it's just this concept of tracking. So I suggest you put some thought into that. Maybe change the language from non-exercise accounted thermogenesis to just simply non-exercise activity tracking, and look at it that way. And then just every time you're about to engage in something, consider, is it or is it not exercise? And then just file it or account it in that way. And then the final thought is, I actually strongly suggest you do exactly that, is create a method of accounting, whether it's a journal, a spreadsheet, however you personally choose to manipulate your data. But I do strongly suggest you create a daily accounting, then get a weekly average, and then a monthly average, and even if you choose to go crazy, to a 3-month, 6-month, and year average, because at the end of the day, you can see fluctuations in those averages that could have meaning, that you could then go back and consider your behaviors and adjust and adjust and adjust. But just some thoughts from Team EvilGSP on the topic of NEAT and steps. Hope it helps. If you have anything to weigh in, if you have any similar or wildly different thoughts, feel free to fill the comments, as most of you do anyway. But please, I'm actually interested to see what you think of these thoughts and if you have any additional thoughts. Thanks.